Hello, my dear boys and girls, and welcome to this first web lesson. I hope to be satisfying. I hope to be a good teacher, but this is my first attempt I do. Anyway, today we are going to speak about the Victorian novel, as you can see out of the screen. And we are going to follow certain steps and the procedure. Step by step, we analyze certain aspects. You have already got some material, and I already told you that we had to use your textbook by Zanichelli, that is, and we are at page 24 and 25. But now let's go straight to the point and straight to the lesson. So my picture-in-picture is now very small, and I want you to concentrate on what you can see on the page, that they are the 2 pages of your book, as I have already said. So you can read through this book and you can find out all the information that I am going to explain to you in a moment. Now we pass to next page, where there are 2 exercises. Doing the exercises, we are guided to understand better the period. So we are going to speak about the novel, which was the main literary genre of the period. As poetry had been the main literary genre for the Romantic poets, now it is a prose, it is the novel. Let's analyze it through exercise number 2, and I want you to concentrate your attention on this. So I am quicker, probably, otherwise I lose a lot of time. I am, you know that I speak too much, and I don't have to do this. There is, first of all, this exercise says that you have to make notes under the following headings. The novel of the time, there is a close relationship between writers and readers. There are the circulating libraries, the publishing world. The novel of the time had new features. The novel which is deeply linked to the society, and the role of the narrator, the setting, and the characters. Let's now analyze the first point. While there is a close relationship between writers and readers, it's obvious. The readers had become more numerous, and the readers belong to the new middle class. And the new middle class, I dare to say, were made by women. So most of the readers were women, but forget that. And let's say that the writers took very clear in their mind the importance of satisfying the taste of the readers. So they tried to have their feedback, because they used a certain strategy. Which strategy? The strategy not to write books and to sell these books in bookshops, but to write chapters by chapter after chapter, so that readers could buy magazines where the chapter was published, and they could read. This aspect was of a fundamental importance because thanks to the installments, the writer was able to create in the reading public expectancy. In other words, when they finished to read the chapter, they wanted to know what was going on, what was going to happen, and so they were involved to buy the next copies. So we can see the answer, that is an ideal answer, of course, taken from the book, that you can also use as your guide. Another important aspect was the presence of circulating libraries. Thanks to these circulating libraries, people had not to buy books. They were too expensive, or also magazines. So thanks to the circulating libraries, they could borrow books, read them, and give them back. And so this is another important factor. What about the publishing world? We have already said this aspect. The use of the technique of the installments. Pages and pages written and published in the most important periodicals of the time. These allowed the writer to control, to have a check of the taste of the reading public. In other words, this was a strategy because it allowed the writer to change something, to modify something according to what the public expects from the writer. But what were the new features of this novel? We can see here that the new novel had a great role. First of all, it was written for the middle class. And of course, we can't forget, we have to remember that there was a great change in the social and the scientific life. And the spread of scientific knowledge, the spread of democracy, in other words, they wrote, the poets or the writers of the time had to take all this into consideration. They had to write realistic and analytical novel. They had to write social and humanitarian novel. They had to write moral novels and so on. So it's so obvious that this anticipates what we are going to deal with the next number 5 point. A novel which was deeply connected to society. In fact, in the 40s, the writer thought that he had a role. As the Romantic poet thought he had a role, and to play a role for the society, to wake up the people from their, sleep, from their mute situation. Now they were convinced that they had a responsibility. They wanted to speak and to reflect about what had been going on in the last decades. And so they spoke about the Industrial Revolution, they spoke about democracy, they spoke about the importance of towns and cities. So all these things, but if this matched the taste of the reading public, the writer of the time wanted to express something in a more realistic way. In other words, he wanted to describe also the greater difficulty of the poor classes, of the workers, as I have often said in our class. But this was not possible. He had to be very careful. And so also the writer had to take into consideration what the Victorianism or the Victorian moral codes was. Okay, so we have already said this, the role of the narrator. The role of the narrator was fundamental because he was convinced that he had to clearly define what was right, what was wrong, what was negative, what was positive. And it was clear that in society there was the double, the evil and the good, and it was the writer's role to to have this honest narrator that with his own point of view. A new approach to setting, of course. The setting could be the countryside. Of course, the new set was the industrial civilization. And the industrial civilization, what does it mean? It means that the new setting was the productive society, but also with the negative aspects of this productive society. In other words, when the writer spoke and describes this new setting, it is an anonymous setting. An anonymous because it is as, for example, people live in a landscape, in a place without identities. The new characters are other important aspect. The new characters had to be in harmony with the Victorian society. Individual had to be, but we have got time to speak about this. Now, let's do very quickly the other aspect, as I have said, the map of the Victorian novels. You have got a complete photocopies I gave you, but the new Victorian novel we can divide in. We have 4 blocks: the novel of manners, the humanitarian novel, the literary nonsense, and the novel of formation. The most important one, I think, was the humanitarian novel and the novel of formation. But also the novel of manners is important. The main representatives were Thackeray, while the other 2, humanitarian novel and the novel of formation, were the main representatives were Charles Dickens, above all in the humanitarian novel. And we have got time to speak about Charles Dickens, because Dickens spoke about realistic, fantastic, but also moral in nature in his novels. The main representative of the novel of formation were 2, but there are also some others. One is once again Charles Dickens, and the other is Charlotte Bronte. And the main feature is to describe, as it happens in Oliver Twist, the life of a child, and it describes the life of a child from childhood to adult life. I don't give much importance to the literary nonsense, because this one is about Lear and Carroll. It is a kind of a novel which we have got time to speak in the second part of Victorian Age.